Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. I still remember the sound of screeching tires, the way her scream cut through the night air, the sickening thud as our car hit the guardrail. It's been 8 months since I killed my fiancée. That's not what the police report says, of course. The official finding was that a deer jumped in front of our car on Route 7 just outside of Burlington, and in my attempt to avoid it, I lost control on the rain-slicked road. Hannah wasn't wearing her seatbelt because she'd just turned around to grab something from the back seat. A tragic accident, they said. But I know the truth. I'd had 2 beers at dinner. Not enough to be over the limit, but enough to dull my reflexes by precious milliseconds. I was checking a text when the headlights caught the deer's eyes. If I'd been fully alert, fully present, she might still be here. After the funeral, I couldn't bear to stay in our apartment in Burlington. Couldn't handle the sympathetic glances from friends and co-workers. Worst of all was the forgiveness from her parents, who somehow didn't blame me even though I blamed myself. I needed to disappear to punish myself in ways the law wouldn't. That's how I ended up in Cabot, Vermont, population 1,433. It's a tiny dairy town in the Northeast Kingdom, about as remote as you can get while still technically being part of civilization. My grandmother had left me a small cabin on a dirt road off of Route 2 and 15. I'd spent summers here as a kid, but hadn't visited in 15 years. The place was weathered but structurally sound, a fitting metaphor for what remained of my life. I found work at the Cabot Creamery factory for a while, but the day shift chatter and forced small talk was more than I could handle. I needed isolation, silence, time to stew in my guilt like a proper penance. That's when I saw the job listing on the bulletin board at the Hastings store, the town's lone general store, gas station post office combo. Driver needed for specialized night deliveries, must be comfortable with rural driving in all weather conditions. Strict adherence to schedule and protocol required. Apply in person. Thaddeus Miller, Shepherd's Hollow Farm. The pay listed was startlingly good for rural Vermont, enough that I could work just 3 nights a week and still cover my minimal expenses. I copied down the number and called from the payphone outside. Thaddeus Miller had a gruff voice that seemed to belong to a much older man than the 40-something farmer who greeted me at his weathered farmhouse the next day. His handshake was crushing, his gaze evaluating. The Miller family had been in Cabot for 6 generations, he told me, and ran one of the few independent dairy operations that hadn't been absorbed by the cooperatives. "It's not milk you'll be delivering," he said as we sat at his kitchen table, the wood worn smooth by decades of elbows and coffee mugs. It's specialty goods for specific customers, medical supplies mostly, for folks who can't get into town easily, some other things too. He slid a paper across to me. We only deliver between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. There are reasons for that. The paper contained a list of rules. At first glance they seemed bizarre, even paranoid. But Thaddeus wasn't smiling. His weathered face was deadly serious as he watched me read. "Those aren't suggestions," he said quietly. "They're survival instructions. Follow them to the letter or don't take the job." I should have walked away, should have recognized the warning signs. But beneath my grief was a darker impulse, a voice that whispered I deserved whatever danger lurked on those night roads. If following some strange rules while making deliveries in the dead of night was my punishment, so be it. I took the job and signed my name on Thaddeus's contract. Only later would I understand exactly what I'd agreed to and why the route was only run in those dark hours when the boundary between worlds grows thin. The list of rules sat on my dashboard, illuminated by the dim glow of my truck's interior light. It was 12:42 a.m. and I was parked at the edge of Thaddeus Miller's property, a thermos of coffee keeping me company as I reviewed the instructions. One final time before my first night on the route. Shepherd's Hollow Farm Delivery Protocol. Begin your route precisely at 1 a.m., not a minute earlier, not a minute later. Deliveries must be completed before 4 a.m. Return to the farm immediately if you're running behind schedule. Do not deviate from the designated route marked on your map for any reason. If you see hitchhikers, do not stop. Do not make eye contact. Keep driving. If someone or something other than your designated recipient approaches the vehicle during a delivery, lock the doors and drive away immediately. Never exit your vehicle unless you are at a delivery location. When making a delivery, flash your headlights 3 times and wait for the porch light to flash twice in response before exiting your vehicle. Leave packages at the designated drop point only. Do not hand items directly to recipients, even if they insist. If you hear your name called from the woods, ignore it. Do not respond. Do not look. If your radio turns on by itself, turn it off immediately. If it turns on a 3rd time, abandon your route and return to the farm. The rules seemed excessive, paranoid even, but Thaddeus had been dead serious when explaining them. The kingdom has its own rules after dark, he'd said cryptically. Folks around here respect the old ways for good reason. My watch beeped at 12:55. I folded the paper, tucked it into my jacket pocket, and started the engine of the white Ford F-150 with Shepherd's Hollow Farm painted on the doors. The truck was older but meticulously maintained. The cargo area was covered with a locked cap, and I hadn't been allowed to see what was inside, just told that each delivery had a numbered tag corresponding to addresses on my route sheet. At exactly 1 a.m., I pulled out onto Route 215. The late October air was crisp, with frost already forming on the edges of the fields. The cab was warm, but I still felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. My first delivery was to a modest farmhouse on Danville Hill Road. I followed the protocol exactly. 3 flashes of the headlights, waiting for the double flash response from the porch light. When it came, I grabbed package number 1, placed it on the designated drop box at the edge of the property, and returned to my truck without incident. Easy enough. Maybe all these rules were just Thaddeus being overly cautious. The second delivery was deeper into the rural outskirts, on a dirt road off of West Shore Road near Joe's Pond. The houses were farther apart here, the darkness between them more absolute. My headlights cut through fog that seemed to have materialized from nowhere, creating an eerie tunnel of visibility that extended only 20 feet ahead. I slowed down as my GPS indicated I was approaching the address. A small cabin set back from the road. I flashed my lights 3 times, then waited. No response. I checked the address again, confirmed I was in the right place, and tried once more. 3 flashes, then silence. The cabin remained dark. Protocol dictated I should move on if there was no response. But this was only my first night. I didn't want to return with undelivered packages. Maybe they were asleep and didn't see my signal. Just as I was reaching for my phone to call Thaddeus for instructions, the porch light flickered. Once, twice, then a 3rd time. Wrong response. The rules specified 2 flashes. I put the truck in reverse, backing away slowly, eyes fixed on the cabin. The porch light came on fully now, and a figure stepped out onto the deck. Even from this distance, something seemed off about their proportions. Arms too long, neck at an odd angle. Then I remembered rule number 5. If someone or something other than your designated recipient approaches the vehicle during the delivery, lock the doors and drive away immediately. I slammed the truck into drive and hit the gas, tires spinning on the gravel. In my rearview mirror, I saw the figure leap off the porch with inhuman speed, covering ground in long, loping strides. My heart hammered against my ribs as I accelerated down the dirt road, taking turns too fast, praying I wouldn't slide off into the ditch. After a few minutes of frantic driving, I pulled over, gasping for breath. The road behind me was empty. Once my hands stopped shaking, I called Thaddeus. "You followed protocol." "Good." His voice was steady, unsurprised. "Mark that delivery as postponed and continue your route. We'll discuss it when you return." The rest of the deliveries went smoothly, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the tree line. At one stop, an elderly woman named Margaret Dunham on Lower Cabot Road actually waved to me from her window before I left, the only human interaction of the night. As I approached my final delivery on Cabot Plains Road, my radio suddenly burst to life, static filling the cab. I immediately reached to switch it off, remembering rule number 10. The dial moved easily under my fingers, but the static continued for another 3 seconds before cutting out. A warning? A coincidence? I wasn't sure, but my fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter as I continued through the darkness. The last house was isolated at the end of a long driveway bordered by ancient maple trees. I completed the delivery without incident, but as I was returning to my truck, I heard it. "My name," whispered from the edge of the woods. "James." I froze, the empty delivery bag clutched to my hands. "James, we've been waiting for you. Rule number 9. If you hear your name called from the woods, ignore it. Do not respond. Do not look." I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove away, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. But I could have sworn I saw movement in my peripheral vision, something pale and elongated, slipping between the trees, keeping pace with my vehicle until I finally reached the main road. It was 3:47 a.m. when I pulled back into Thaddeus's farm. He was waiting on the porch, a shotgun resting casually across his lap. "How was your first night?" he asked as I approached. "I think," I said carefully, "that you need to tell me what I'm really delivering." "And to whom?" Thaddeus Miller's kitchen felt different in the pre-dawn hours, older somehow, as if the darkness revealed its true age. He placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of me, then sat across the worn oak table, his weathered hands wrapped around his own mug, knuckles like small mountain ranges. "What did you see tonight?" he asked, his voice careful, measuring. I described the cabin with the wrong light signal, the figure with the strange proportions, and the voice that had called my name from the woods. With each detail, Thaddeus's expression grew grimmer. "You did well to follow protocol," he said finally. "Most newcomers get curious. Curiosity kills in these parts." "What exactly am I delivering?" I asked. "And what was that thing at the second location?" Thaddeus took a long sip of his coffee before answering. "You're delivering protection," he said. "Wards, charms, specially prepared dairy products, and other things the old families need to keep themselves safe." "Safe from what?" "The people of Cabot have a complicated history," Thaddeus began, leaning back in his chair. "This area was Abenaki land long before Europeans arrived. When settlers came, there was conflict, but eventually an arrangement was reached." He rose and walked to an old roll-top desk in the corner, retrieving a leather-bound journal that looked at least a century old. He placed it on the table between us, opening to a hand-drawn map of the region. "My great-great-grandfather was one of the first settlers to make peace with the Abenaki. They taught him about the other inhabitants of these hills, the ones that were here before even the native tribes. Entities that could wear human skin, but were something else entirely underneath." "Skinwalkers?" I asked, remembering horror stories I'd read online. Thaddeus shook his head. "Similar concept, different creatures. The Abenaki called them Pamola, the Nightwalkers. They hunt by mimicry, taking the appearance of loved ones or travelers. They're most powerful in the hours of deep night between 1 and 4 a.m. That's why we do our deliveries then. It's when the protection is most needed. And people just Live with this? I asked incredulously. For generations. There's a balance. We stay out of certain areas, observe specific protocols, and make regular offerings through trusted intermediaries. That's partly what you're delivering. In return, they mostly leave us alone. He tapped a gnarled finger on the map. The problems come when someone breaks the rules, or when outsiders blunder in unaware, like the cabin tonight, the Webster place. Been empty for months. Looks like something's moved in. He made a note in a small pocketbook. We'll handle it. The routes change sometimes. Certain locations become compromised. And the voice in the woods, the one that knew my name. His eyes met mine, deadly serious. They've noticed you now. That's to be expected. Your new blood. They'll test you, try to trick you into breaking protocol, never respond, never look directly at them, and most importantly, never invite them in, to your vehicle or your home. I felt a chill run through me. That had nothing to do with the early morning air. Why would anyone take this job? Why do you stay here? Thaddeus's leathery face creased into what might have been a smile. This is our home. Has been for generations. We've adapted. Besides, the soil here is special. Makes for dairy products you can't produce anywhere else. There's power in the land, for good and ill. He stood up, walked to a cupboard, and returned with a small wooden box. Opening it, he removed what looked like a small cheesecloth bundle, tied with red thread, and a glass vial of white powder. "Hang this above your front door," he said, handing me the bundle, "and sprinkle this across your threshold and windowsills. It won't keep them out completely if they're determined, but they'll need an invitation to enter." I took the items, feeling slightly ridiculous, yet unable to dismiss what I'd seen. "How many drivers have you had before me?" Something flickered across Thaddeus's face. "Enough. Some move on. Some decide to stay in Cabot permanently. A few." He trailed off, then squared his shoulders. "A few didn't follow the rules. And what happened to them? They aren't around anymore." He closed the journal with a quiet thump. "Get some rest today. Tomorrow night is your next shift. Dawn's coming soon. You should head home while it's light." I left Thaddeus's farm as the first pale light of dawn crept over the green mountains. In the morning sun, the countryside looked pastoral and peaceful, nothing like the eerie landscape I'd driven through hours before. I followed his instructions at my cabin, feeling self-conscious as I sprinkled the powder and hung the strange bundle. Then I collapsed into an exhausted sleep, my dreams filled with elongated figures running alongside my truck. When I woke in the late afternoon, I drove into town to get supplies at the Hastings store. As I grabbed coffee and sandwich fixings, I overheard two older men talking by the checkout. Another missing hiker up near West Hill Pond, third one this month. One was saying, "Tourist season's over. They should know better than to wander the trails after dark." The other replied with little sympathy. The cashier, a woman in her 60s named Barbara, according to her name tag, noticed me listening. "You're the new driver for Thaddeus, aren't you?" she asked as she rang up my items. I nodded, surprised. "Word travels fast in small towns," she said with a tight smile. "You be careful out there. Some roads aren't meant to be travelled at night." "I'm learning that," I replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you mind my asking why you took the job? Most locals won't do it." I thought about Hannah, about the accident, about my need for penance. "I needed a change," I said simply. Barbara seemed to accept this. As she handed me my change, she added in a lower voice, "Margaret Dunham said you made a delivery to her place last night, said you did it proper." Didn't try to bring the package to her door, respected the drop point. "Just following instructions," I said. "Keep doing that," she advised, her expression serious. "And if your radio turns on by itself, remember to count how many times." Before I could ask her how she knew about that particular rule, another customer walked up to the register. I left with my groceries, more unsettled than before. That evening, I scoured the internet for information about Cabot legends or local folklore involving creatures called mola. Most searches turned up nothing useful, just generic cryptid stories and tourist trap nonsense about the Vermont woods. However, on a forum dedicated to New England folklore, I found a single thread from 3 years ago. A user named VT Night Driver had posted about strange experiences while making deliveries in the Northeast Kingdom. The descriptions matched what Thaddeus had told me, right down to specific rules about not responding to voices. The thread ended abruptly after other users dismissed the stories as creative fiction. VT Night Driver's final post read simply, "You don't have to believe me. But if you're ever on the back roads near Cabot between 1 and 4 a.m., remember, don't look at what follows you. Don't respond when it calls your name, and never ever stop for a hitchhiker, no matter how familiar they look." The account had never posted again. I closed my laptop and glanced out the window. The sun was setting, painting the hills in shades of orange and crimson. In a few hours, I would need to sleep if I wanted to be alert for tomorrow night's route. As I was drawing the curtains, I noticed something at the edge of the tree line. A dark figure standing perfectly still, watching my cabin. When I blinked, it was gone. I double-checked the powder line at my door and windows before going to bed, no longer feeling foolish about the precaution. Whatever was happening in Cabot, whatever I had signed up for, it was all too real, and it was watching me. My second night began much like the first, reviewing the rules in Thaddeus's driveway, waiting for 1 a.m. precisely. But tonight, the air felt different. Heavier somehow, charged with an electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end beneath my jacket. "Different route tonight," Thaddeus had said when I arrived, handing me a new map with 7 stops marked in red. "We're avoiding the Webster place and focusing on the eastern properties. The moon's nearly full, and they get more active during this phase." The first delivery went smoothly, a farmhouse on Cabot Plains Road, where an elderly man named Edwin Fletcher acknowledged my headlight signal promptly and remained respectfully inside as I left his package at the designated drop point. The second stop was a small cottage tucked against the base of Danville Hill. As I pulled up the narrow dirt driveway, my headlights caught something moving across the road behind me, a swift, low shadow that disappeared into the underbrush too quickly to identify. Fox, maybe, or coyote. I performed the signal ritual, 3 flashes, 2 in response, and completed the delivery without incident. It was on the way to the third location that things began to feel wrong. I was driving along a particularly isolated stretch of South Walden Road when my truck's temperature gauge suddenly spiked, the needle jumping into the red. Steam began to curl from beneath the hood. I pulled over, cursing my luck. Rule number 6, never exit your vehicle unless you are at a delivery location. Rule number 3, do not deviate from the designated route for any reason, but if the truck overheated completely, I'd be stranded. I reached for my phone to call Thaddeus, but the screen showed no service, not unusual in the remote hills of the Northeast Kingdom. I sat there for a full minute, weighing my options, when the temperature gauge abruptly dropped back to normal. The steam dissipated as if it had never been there at all. A test or a lure. I put the truck back in drive and continued on, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. At the third stop, a rambling Victorian on the outskirts of West Danville, I noticed a peculiar detail. The drop box at the edge of the property had strange symbols carved into its wooden surface, similar to the patterns on the bundle Thaddeus had given me from my cabin. I completed the delivery quickly, feeling watched from the darkened windows of the house. Between the third and fourth stops, it happened. I had just turned onto a narrow road that wound through a thick stand of maple trees when my radio clicked on by itself. Remembering rule number 10, I immediately turned it off. Barely 30 seconds later, it turned on again, this time emitting a strange warbling tone that made my teeth ache. I switched it off again, my mouth dry. If it turned on a third time, I was supposed to abandon my route and return to the farm. I waited, every muscle tense, but the radio remained silent. I continued on. The fourth delivery was to a homestead on Whittier Hill Road, the house set far back from the road behind an apple orchard. I completed the signal pattern and was returning to my truck after placing the package when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thumping from the covered bed of my pickup. Something was inside. I froze, keys in hand, suddenly aware of how isolated I was. The protocol didn't cover this specific situation. I circled the truck cautiously, seeing no obvious signs of entry. The cargo cap was still locked, the seal unbroken. The thumping came again, followed by what sounded like a whispered voice. I had to look. Deliveries were still locked inside, and I couldn't continue the route without them. Very carefully, I unlocked the cap and raised it just enough to peer inside. Nothing seemed amiss. The remaining packages sat undisturbed, each tagged with its corresponding address. I was about to close it when I noticed a strange discoloration on one of the parcels. A dark, wet-looking stain that I was certain hadn't been there before. As I watched, the stain moved, sliding across the paper, wrapping like oil on water. I slammed the cap shut, locked it, and practically leapt into the driver's seat. Whatever was happening back there, Thaddeus would know how to handle it. I decided to complete one more delivery. It was on the way back to the farm anyway, and then seek his guidance. The fifth stop was a modern cabin on Joe's Pond, one of the few properties with its lights still on at this hour. I flashed my headlights 3 times and waited for the response, trying to ignore the occasional subtle movement I now detected from the cargo area. The porch light flashed twice in perfect rhythm. I grabbed the correct package, thankfully not the one with the strange stain, and approached the drop point, a covered box near the foot of the driveway. As I was placing the package inside, I heard a door open. Breaking protocol, I looked up to see a middle-aged woman standing on the porch, waving to get my attention. "James! James Calloway!" she called, using my full name. "Please, I need to speak with you. It's important." How did she know my name? Thaddeus had never mentioned the recipients knowing the drivers personally. Rule number 8. Leave packages at the designated drop point only. Do not hand items directly to recipients, even if they insist. "I'm sorry, Ma'am," I called back, already backing toward my truck. "I'm just supposed to leave the delivery." "It's about Hannah," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. "She's been trying to reach you." I froze. Hannah, my dead fiancée. "What did you say?" The words escaped me before I could stop them. The woman took a step forward. "Hannah Phillips, your fiancée. The accident wasn't your fault, James. She wants you to know that." My heart hammered against my ribs. There was no way this woman could know these details. Hannah's last name. The accident. "Who are you?" I demanded, even as a voice in my head screamed at me to get back in the truck, to stop engaging. "A friend," she said, taking another step forward. Something about her movement seemed off, too fluid, as if her joints weren't quite in the right places. "Hannah is with me now. She forgives you. She wants to see you." Rule number 5. If someone or something other than your designated recipient approaches the vehicle during a delivery, lock the doors and drive away immediately. I backed up until I felt the truck behind me. The woman, or whatever was pretending to be a woman, smiled. Her mouth stretched just a fraction too wide. "Don't you want to be forgiven, James? Don't you want to see her again?" She was at the bottom of the porch steps now. "I can take you to her. Right now." My fingers found the door handle, and I yanked it open, keeping my eyes on the figure. "You're not real," I managed to say. "Whatever you are, you're not real." Her expression changed. the pleasant mask slipping for just a moment to reveal something ancient and hungry underneath. "Oh, I'm real enough, James Calloway, and I know what you did." The beer, the text message, the moment of distraction that killed her. Her voice changed mid-sentence, morphing into Hannah's. "You killed me, Jamie. You weren't watching the road." The sound of Hannah's voice, her actual voice, with the slight New York accent she'd never quite lost after moving to Vermont, made my knees weak. I gripped the truck door to stay upright. "You're not her," I whispered. The thing wearing the woman's shape tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Number." "But I can look like her if you prefer." Before my eyes, the figure began to change, its features flowing like wax, reshaping into a face I knew better than my own. Hannah's face, her dark curls, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the dimple in her right cheek. "Jamie," it said in her voice, perfect down to the way she slightly emphasized the second syllable of my name. "Come with me. I'm so cold without you." I almost took a step toward it. Almost. But then I remembered the rules, the warnings, the things Thaddeus had told me about creatures that hunt through mimicry. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I tore my gaze away, threw myself into the truck, and locked the doors. In my rearview mirror, I could see the thing that wasn't Hannah standing in the middle of the road, its borrowed face contorted with rage. I gummed the engine and drove, my vision blurred with tears. The thumping from the cargo area grew more insistent, but I ignored it, focused only on putting distance between myself and that abomination. When I finally pulled into Thaddeus's farm, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely shift into park. He was waiting as before, shopped in across his lap. One look at my face told him everything. "You saw something," he said. It wasn't a question. It knew things about Hannah, I managed. Personal things. "How is that possible?" Thaddeus's expression darkened. "They get into your head, pull out memories, desires, guilt. It's how they hunt." He nodded toward the truck. Something else happened, too. I told him about the radio, the thumping, and the strange stain on one of the packages. Without a word, he rose and approached the truck, shotgun ready. When he opened the cargo cap, I braced myself for something to leap out. Instead, he simply reached in and removed the stained package, holding it away from his body. "We burn this one," he said grimly, "and tomorrow we reinforce your protections. They've marked you now." "Marked me? What does that mean?" Thaddeus looked at me, his eyes reflecting the first hint of dawn on the horizon. "It means your third night is going to be much, much harder." I slept at Thaddeus's farmhouse that morning, too rattled to return to my isolated cabin. He gave me a small room off the kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in years, though the sheets were clean. I dreamt of Hannah standing at the foot of my bed, her features slowly melting and reshaping into something inhuman. When I woke around noon, the house was filled with the aroma of cooking. I found Thaddeus in the kitchen with an older woman, short, stout, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was stirring something in a cast-iron pot that smelled like herbs and burnt sugar. "This is my sister, Agatha," Thaddeus said by way of introduction. "She knows more about protections than anyone in the county." Agatha looked me up and down with piercing blue eyes. "So you're the new driver. Saw one of them, did you?" I nodded. It looked like my fiancée. Knew things about her. "They're good at that," she said, turning back to her mixture. "Get in your head, find what hurts most and use it against you. But they can't create, only mimic. Remember that." Thaddeus motioned for me to sit at the table where a plate of eggs and toast waited. "Eat. You'll need your strength. We've got work to do before tonight." As I ate, they explained more about the history of Cabot and the surrounding areas. For generations, the Miller family had been responsible for maintaining what Agatha called the boundary. Not a physical line, but a set of rituals, offerings and protections that kept the molar mostly confined to certain territories. The deliveries you're making, they're part of it, Thaddeus explained. Some packages contain wards and protections for the old families. Others are offerings that need to be placed at specific points in the woods. Those aren't on your current route. And the contaminated package from last night? I asked. Agatha's expression darkened. One of them was trying to hitch a ride, get into your home or trace your route. Good thing you noticed. After breakfast, Thaddeus took me to a small outbuilding behind the main house. Inside was a workshop, filled with dried herbs hanging from the rafters, shelves of glass jars containing mysterious substances, and workbenches covered with tools and half-finished projects. "We need to strengthen your protections," he said, selecting items from the shelves. "They've noticed you now, and they'll be more persistent." For the next few hours, we worked under Agatha's direction, preparing more powerful wards than the simple ones Thaddeus had given me earlier. She taught me how to make a protective salve from beeswax, milk from Thaddeus's special cows, and herbs from their garden. The mixture was heated in a small copper pot over a wood fire, with Agatha adding pinches of various powders while muttering what sounded like prayers or incantations under her breath. "Rub this on your wrists, behind your ears, and over your heart before you start your route," she instructed, pouring the cooled mixture into a small tin. "It won't stop them completely, but it'll make it harder for them to get in your head." Thaddeus, meanwhile, was modifying my truck. He installed small iron nails at each corner of the vehicle, carved subtle symbols into the door frames, and placed small cloth bundles similar to the one on my cabin door beneath each seat. "The iron disrupts their ability to shapeshift," he explained as he worked. "These old protections have kept our families safe for generations." "Why me?" I finally asked as we finished. "Why hire outsiders for this job if it's so dangerous?" Thaddeus and Agatha exchanged a glance. "The boundary requires blood not native to these hills," Agatha said after a moment. "Outsider blood. It strengthens the protections. You're using me as bait?" I felt a surge of anger. "Not bait," Thaddeus said quickly. "A sentinel. Yes, they're drawn to you because you're new, but that makes the protections you deliver more potent, and you're safer than most. You're already marked by grief. They can't offer you anything you truly want." "They offered me Hannah," I said quietly. "But you knew it wasn't really her," Agatha pointed out. "Someone desperate enough to believe the lie would have gone with them." "You didn't." I thought about that moment of temptation. How close I'd come to stepping toward the thing wearing Hannah's face. Had my grief actually protected me instead of making me vulnerable? After completing the preparations, I returned to my cabin to rest before the night's shift. The place felt different now, more secure with the enhanced protections Thaddeus and Agatha had helped me create. I reinforced the powder lines at the doors and windows and hung the new ward bundles at each corner of the house. As evening approached, I found myself on my laptop again, searching for more information about the creatures Thaddeus called Pomola. This time I found an obscure anthropology paper discussing Abenaki folklore of the Northeast Kingdom. It mentioned entities that could assume human form to lure unwary travelers into the deep forest, where they would be trapped between worlds. The paper noted that these legends were particularly strong around the Cabot and Danville areas. One paragraph caught my attention. Local stories suggest these entities are particularly active during what locals call the hollow hours, 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., when the boundary between worlds is thinnest. Some older residents still maintain curious practices, such as covering mirrors during these hours and placing protective objects at thresholds. I was startled by a knock at my door. Cautiously, I approached, calling out, "Who is it?" "Barbara, from the store," came the reply. I checked my watch. 7:15 p.m., still daylight. Probably safe, but I remained careful as I opened the door. The older woman from the Hastings store stood on my porch holding a small paper bag. "Brought you some essentials," she said. "Thaddeus called, said you might need these." I invited her in, noting how she carefully stepped over the powder line at the threshold without disturbing it. "So, you're staying on then?" she asked, placing the bag on my kitchen counter. Inside were candles, matches, salt, and a small metal flask. "For now," I replied. "To be honest, I'm not sure I have a choice anymore." Barbara's weathered face softened. "There's always a choice, young man. But those who belong here tend to find their way to these hills one way or another." "What do you mean?" She studied me for a moment. "Has Thaddeus told you about the previous drivers?" I shook my head. "There have been 17 in my lifetime," she said. 7 left after their first encounter. 5 completed their contracts and moved away. 3. She paused. 3 broke the rules and 2 became permanent residents, like me. "You were a driver?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. 30 years ago. Came here running from a bad marriage, found something worth staying for." She gestured to the protective symbols I'd placed around the cabin. "You've got a knack for this. Not everyone takes to the old ways so quickly." Before leaving, Barbara pressed a small wooden carving into my hand, a simple figure that resembled a stylized crow. "Keep this with you on the route. It belonged to my husband. The Corvids are messengers between worlds. They can warn you when the others are near." After she left, I prepared for the night ahead. I followed Agatha's instructions, applying the protective salve to my wrists, behind my ears, and over my heart. I tucked Barbara's carving into my pocket, and I read over the rules once more, committing every word to memory. Whatever watched from the woods, whatever had stolen Hannah's face, I would be ready for it tonight. Or so I thought. Thaddeus was unusually solemn when I arrived at the farm that night. "Tonight's route is different," he explained, spreading a new map across the hood of my truck. "You'll be making deliveries to the boundary markers themselves." The route traced a rough circle around Cabot, hitting points in the deepest, most isolated stretches of forest. Only 3 regular deliveries to actual houses were marked. The rest were to locations identified only by GPS coordinates. "What exactly am I delivering to these markers?" I asked. Thaddeus opened the cargo area and showed me a series of small clay jars sealed with beeswax. "Offerings," he said simply. "You'll place 1 at each marker. They're all identical, so it doesn't matter which goes where." He handed me a new addition to the rules, a laminated addendum labeled Boundary Marker Protocol. Boundary Marker Protocol. Approach markers only from the direction indicated by the arrow on your map. Place the offering jar in the hollow of the stone marker. Do not break the seal. Speak these words clearly. The offering is made in accordance with the old agreement. Safe passage is requested. Wait 30 seconds for acknowledgement. If none comes, repeat once. If still no acknowledgement, leave immediately. Acknowledgement will come as a brief light or sound from the forest. Once received, depart immediately without looking back. If you hear voices other than the acknowledgement, ignore them completely. Under no circumstances should you stray from the marked path or follow anything you see near the markers. This seems more ritualistic than the regular deliveries, I observed. Because it is, Thaddeus replied. Tonight you're not just delivering protections, you're renewing the boundary itself. The new moon makes the veil thinner, but it's also when the boundary can be strengthened. I looked at him sharply. New moon? You said they were more active during the full moon. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. I needed to see if you'd follow the rules even when not fully aware of the dangers. You did well, he clasped my shoulder. Tonight, will be the real test. As I prepared to leave, Agatha emerged from the house carrying a small leather pouch on a cord. "Wear this around your neck," she instructed, handing it to me. "Don't remove it for any reason until you return. And take this." She pressed a small knife with a bone handle into my palm. "Iron blade, only for emergencies." The weight of the knife in my jacket pocket was somehow reassuring as I pulled away from the farmhouse at exactly 1 a.m. The night was moonless and unnaturally still, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. My first stop was one of the regular deliveries, the Dunham place on Lower Cabot Road. Margaret Dunham responded to my signal promptly, and I completed the delivery without incident. The second stop, another house delivery on Whittier Hill Road, went similarly smoothly. It was at the third stop, the first boundary marker, that I began to understand the true nature of my job. The coordinates led me to a narrow dirt track that veered off from West Shore Road near Joe's Pond. I had to drive slowly, branches scraping against the sides of my truck as the path narrowed. Finally, the GPS indicated I had arrived, though all I could see were dense woods. Following the protocol, I took one of the clay jars and the flashlight Thaddeus had given me, modified with a copper wire wrapped around its base, and headed into the trees in the direction indicated on the map. About 50 yards in, I found it. A standing stone about waist-high, weathered and covered with lichen, but clearly shaped by human hands. Ancient symbols were carved into its surface, similar to those I had seen on the protection charms, but more elaborate. At its base was a hollow, perfectly sized for the offering jar. I placed the jar in the hollow and spoke the words exactly as instructed. "The offering is made in accordance with the old agreement. Safe passage is requested." For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The forest remained eerily silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, nothing. I was about to repeat the phrase when I heard it. A soft melodic tone, like a single chime, struck in the distance. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the stone, a brief blue-green light flickered and died. Acknowledgement received. I turned to leave, remembering not to look back. That's when I heard my name. James. The voice was different this time. Not Hannah's, but one I recognized nonetheless. My brother Michael, who lived in Boston and whom I hadn't spoken to since Hannah's funeral. "James, help me. I'm lost." Rule number 6. If you hear voices other than the acknowledgement, ignore them completely. I kept walking, forcing one foot in front of the other, focusing on the distant shape of my truck through the trees. "James, please. Something's after me." The desperation in Michael's voice, or what sounded like Michael's voice, was almost impossible to ignore. I heard breaking branches, the sound of running feet, a gasping breath. "It's going to kill me, James. Please." My hand found the iron knife in my pocket. For a moment I hesitated, half turning. No, it wasn't Michael. It couldn't be. My brother was safe in Boston, probably asleep in his apartment with his wife beside him. This was another trick, another mimicry. I reached my truck and started the engine with shaking hands. As I pulled away, my headlights swept across the edge of the trees, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure. Not my brother, but something thin and pale, with 2 long limbs, watching me with reflective eyes. The next 3 boundary markers followed a similar pattern. At each one, I heard voices calling to me. Childhood friends, former colleagues, once even my mother, though she'd passed away years ago. Each time, the mimicry became more desperate, more convincing. And each time, I forced myself to follow protocol, to ignore the pleas, and return to my vehicle. It was at the 7th marker, the last on my route, that things went wrong. This marker was the deepest in the woods, accessible only by a barely visible trail off Callender Brook Road. As I approached the standing stone, I noticed it was different from the others. Larger, carved with more complex symbols, and emanating a faint smell like ozone after a lightning strike. I placed the offering jar and spoke the words. This time, the response came immediately. A cascade of blue-green lights dancing among the trees, accompanied by a sound like distant wind chimes. The acknowledgement was stronger here, more definitive. As I turned to leave, something darted across my path, small, quick, gone before I could focus on it. Then another movement to my right and another to my left. I was surrounded. Keeping my eyes fixed on the path ahead, I walked steadily, one hand on the iron knife. The movements continued around me, always just at the edge of my vision. Soft sounds followed. Not voices this time, but gentle footfalls. The subtle snap of twigs, what might have been breathing. And then my flashlight died. I stood in absolute darkness, heart pounding. The protective salve behind my ears seemed to warm against my skin, and the pouch around my neck vibrated slightly. I remembered Barbara's carved crow in my pocket and clutched it tightly. "I know what you are," I said to the darkness, surprising myself with my own courage, or perhaps foolishness. "I'm following the old agreement. Let me pass." A soft sound came from directly ahead, something between a chuckle and a hiss. Then a voice spoke, unlike any I'd heard before. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in my chest rather than my ears. "New blood," it said. "You carry the grief mark." Interesting. I remained silent, remembering Thaddeus's warning never to engage directly with them. "The Miller emissary grows stronger," the voice continued. "We smell the protections on you, but protections can be broken." My flashlight suddenly flickered back to life, revealing the path ahead and what stood upon it. It was humanoid, but wrong in every possible way. Too tall, too thin, its limbs jointed in impossible places. Its skin was pale as milk, but seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Where a face should have been was a fluid darkness that shifted and swirled like oil on water. It was the first time I'd seen one clearly, not mimicking a human form, the true appearance of a pomola. "The boundary weakens," it said, its non-face rippling. "The old families forget. Soon we will walk freely again." I swallowed hard, trying to remember if the rules covered this situation. There was nothing about direct conversation with these entities. "The Miller family remembers," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've made the offerings according to the agreement." The creature tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Yes, and for that, you may pass. This time." It stepped aside in a movement too fluid to be natural. The path was clear. But remember, grief marked one. It continued as I cautiously moved forward. "We were here before the agreement, before the old families, before your kind walked on two legs, and we will be here after." I walked past it, every muscle tense, expecting at any moment to feel cold hands on my back. But nothing touched me. When I finally reached my truck, I collapsed into the driver's seat, gasping for breath. In my rearview mirror, I saw them at the edge of the forest, 5 or 6 tall, pale figures standing perfectly still, watching. As I started the engine, they retreated into the darkness, melting away like morning mist. The drive back to Thaddeus's farm was a blur. When I arrived, both he and Agatha were waiting anxiously on the porch. One look at my face told them everything. "You saw one of them," Thaddeus said, not mimicking its true form. I nodded, still trembling slightly. It spoke to me, said the boundary is weakening." Agatha and Thaddeus exchanged alarmed glances. "Did it harm you?" Agatha asked, examining me for injuries. "Number it let me pass." Because of the offerings, Thaddeus said with relief. The agreement still holds then. For now, I added, remembering the creature's words. It seemed to think that wouldn't always be the case. Thaddeus's expression darkened. The old families are dwindling. Younger generations move away, forget the traditions. Each year it gets harder to maintain the boundary. Which is why we need you, James, Agatha said, her eyes intense. Why we need new blood who understands what's at stake. As dawn broke over the hills, I sat at Thaddeus's kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before me. I had decisions to make. The logical part of me screamed to pack my things and leave Cabot forever, but another part, the part that had looked into the face of something ancient and terrifying and survived, knew I couldn't walk away. Not anymore. 3 nights passed before my next scheduled route. In that time, Thaddeus insisted I remain at the farm, rather than returning to my isolated cabin. They're watching you more closely now, he explained. You're safer here, where the protections are strongest. I spent those days learning more about Cabot's secret history. Thaddeus showed me journals dating back to the 1790s, when his ancestors first settled the area and encountered the molar. The original agreement, detailed in faded ink on brittle pages, had been reached after several settlers disappeared into the woods, never to return. The Abenaki taught my great-great-grandfather about the boundary, Thaddeus explained as we sat in his study, surrounded by artifacts and old books. They'd maintained it for generations before Europeans arrived, but as their numbers dwindled, the responsibility fell to the settler families who understood the importance. And now those families are dwindling too, I said, remembering the creature's words. Thaddeus nodded grimly. Only 7 of the original 12 families remain. The others moved away, died out, or, he hesitated, were taken. On the evening of the 4th day, vehicles began arriving at the farm. Trucks and cars with local plates, their drivers nodding solemnly to me as they entered the house. By nightfall, nearly 20 people had gathered in Thaddeus's large dining room, ranging in age from teenagers to the elderly. I recognized a few faces: Barbara from the store, Edwin Fletcher from one of my deliveries, Margaret Dunham. The Council of Families, Agatha explained as she bustled around, serving coffee and homemade bread. We gather when the boundary is threatened. Thaddeus called the meeting to order, introducing me as the new driver who has seen their true form. Murmurs rippled through the room, and I felt curious eyes evaluating me. James has reported direct communication with the Pimola at the Calendar Brook marker, Thaddeus announced. It confirmed what some of us have suspected. The boundary weakens. It's the Websters' fault, said a grey-haired man I didn't recognize, abandoning their post, leaving that property unprotected. It's created a gap. The Websters had no choice, Henry, Margaret Dunham replied sharply, after what happened to their boy last winter. Regardless of how it happened, Thaddeus interrupted, we need to strengthen the weak points, double the offerings for the next cycle, and I propose bringing James fully into our confidence. This caused more murmuring, not all of it approving. He's an outsider, objected a stern-faced woman near the back, only been here a few months. He's grief-marked, countered Barbara. They can't tempt him as easily, and he's already seen more than most drivers do in their first year. I agree with Barbara, said Edwin Fletcher, his voice carrying the weight of authority. The Calloway boy has shown his worth, and we need new blood. One by one, the families voted. In the end, only 2 objected to my inclusion. Thaddeus seemed satisfied with the result. Then it's decided, he announced. Tonight, James joins the council and learns the full history. What followed was an education unlike any I could have imagined. For hours, the members of the council shared their knowledge, each family contributing pieces of the puzzle that would cap its true history. I learned that the Pimola weren't demons or monsters in the traditional sense, but rather entities from what the council called the adjacent world, a place that existed alongside our reality, but operated by different rules. They had always been able to cross over at certain places where the boundaries were naturally thin, but the original Abenaki rituals had confined them to specific areas and limited their ability to interact with humans. They feed on emotion, explained Ruth Carter, a retired professor from the State College. Particularly strong emotions like fear, grief, and longing. That's why they mimic loved ones or create situations of terror. They're farming us for sustenance. But they need physical forms in our world, added a younger man named Daniel Fletcher, Edwin's grandson. That's why they hunt. They need vessels. Vessels? I asked. You mean they possess people? Not exactly, Thaddeus said carefully. They replace them. Take their appearance, memories, everything. The original person is gone, consumed. A chill ran through me as I thought of the thing that had worn Hannah's face, had known details only she could know. How do you identify them when they're mimicking someone? I asked. There are signs, Barbara said. Unnatural movements, especially in the joints, aversion to iron and certain herbs. And the eyes. They can never get the eyes quite right. Too fixed, too predatory. The protections I deliver, I said. They keep these things from replacing people. Daniel nodded. The wards prevent them from entering homes uninvited. The offerings maintain the boundary that limits their range. Some of the herbs and mixtures can reveal their true form if you suspect someone's been replaced. As the night deepened, the discussion turned to the immediate problem, the abandoned Webster property and the weakening boundary near it. We need to re-establish the wards there, Thaddeus said, but it's dangerous. They've already taken up residence. Couldn't we simply sell the property to a new family? I suggested. Bring them into the council. Sad glances were exchanged around the table. It doesn't work that way, Edwin explained gently. The connection to the land, to the boundary, it's in the bloodlines. The original families were bound to this place through the first agreement. New people can help, like you, but they can't take on a family's ancestral responsibility. Then what's the solution? Thaddeus cleared his throat. We believe we can perform a ritual to seal the breach, but it requires accessing the original boundary stone on the Webster property. The original stone, I asked. Different from the markers I've been visiting? Much older, Agatha confirmed, carved by the Abenaki centuries ago. Each family property has one, usually in the deepest part of their land. They're the anchors of the entire boundary system. A heavy silence fell over the room. Someone has to go to the Webster place, Barbara finally said. Enter the property, find the stone, and perform the binding ritual. All eyes turned to me. They already know you, Daniel said. Your scent, your grief. But you've also proven you can resist them. And you're not blood-bound to the land yet, added Ruth. You have a certain flexibility they lack. I looked at their faces. These people who had lived their entire lives with this secret burden, maintaining an ancient pact to keep their communities safe. In that moment, I realized I'd found something in Cabot I hadn't expected. A purpose to replace the guilt and grief that had consumed me since Hannah's death. What would I need to do? I asked. The plan came together quickly. In 2 nights, during what Edwin called the hollow hours, I would enter the Webster property with a special offering prepared by Agatha. I would locate the boundary stone using a map Thaddeus provided, perform the ritual as instructed, and hopefully escape before the Pamela realized what had happened. It's dangerous, Thaddeus warned, as the meeting broke up near dawn. Perhaps more dangerous than we're admitting. But if the breach isn't sealed... I understand, I said. And strangely I did. In the short time I'd been in Cabot, I'd seen enough to believe their warnings about what would happen if the boundary failed completely. After the council dispersed, I found myself sitting on Thaddeus's porch, watching the sun rise over the green mountains. Barbara joined me, offering a steaming mug of tea. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "Trying not to," I admitted. "This is all still difficult to process." She nodded, her weathered face understanding. "I felt the same way 30 years ago, thought I must be losing my mind. But there's a strange comfort in it too, isn't there? Knowing there's more to the world than most people ever see. I'm not sure comfort is the word I'd use." Barbara smiled. "Maybe not yet. But purpose? Meaning?" She studied my face. "That accident that brought you here, it's been eating you alive. I can see it in your eyes." I looked away. I was responsible for Hannah's death. "Maybe," she said gently. "Or maybe you were being guided here, where you're needed. The old families believe everything happens for a reason, especially grief that leads people to Cabot." I thought about this as she left me to my thoughts. Could there be meaning in Hannah's death beyond random tragedy? The idea felt both comforting and vaguely disturbing, suggesting an intelligence behind the seemingly random events of my life. As I finally sought my bed with the sun fully risen, I realized one truth with absolute clarity. In 2 nights, I would face the creatures that had haunted my deliveries, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant in this strange hidden war. And whether I succeeded or failed would impact not just my life, but the lives of everyone in Cabot. For the first time since the accident, I felt the weight of responsibility for something larger than my own guilt. The 2 days of preparation passed in a blur of activity. Agatha worked tirelessly in her workshop, creating specialized protections for my mission. The offering itself, a mixture of milk, herbs, honey, and a few drops of my own blood, was sealed in an ornate clay jar carved with symbols I now recognized as binding runes. "Your blood connects you to the ritual," she explained, "makes it harder for them to interfere once it's begun." Thaddeus focused on modifying my truck, adding additional iron nails at strategic points, and replacing the regular headlights with special bulbs that gave off a subtle bluish tint. "Cold iron light," he said when I asked, "disrupts their ability to maintain human form, won't stop them completely, but might slow them down if you need to escape quickly." Daniel Fletcher, who had become something of an ally among the younger council members, helped me memorize the ritual itself, a complex set of gestures and words derived from both Abenaki tradition and European folk magic. "It's not the words themselves that have power," he explained. "It's the intent behind them, the connection to those who've performed the ritual before you. The boundary recognizes the pattern, not just the components." On the night of the mission, the council gathered again at Thaddeus's farm, this time with a more solemn, ceremonial atmosphere. Each family brought small tokens to add to my protection: a pouch of special salt from the Dunhams, an intricately knotted cord from the Carters, a small vial of clear liquid from the Fletchers. Water from Joe's pond, collected at dawn on Midsummer's Day, Edwin explained as his contribution was added to my gear. Been blessed by each generation of our family for nearly 2 centuries. At precisely midnight, the council formed a circle in Thaddeus's barn. I stood in the center, feeling self-conscious as Agatha painted cold, herbal-smelling paste on my forehead, the back of my neck, and my wrists. "May the old ways recognize and protect you," she intoned. "May your path remain clear, and your heart stay strong." The others responded in unison, "So may it be." As the ritual concluded, Thaddeus approached with a final piece of equipment, an old revolver with a worn wooden handle. "Iron bullets," he said quietly, pressing it into my hand. "Last resort only. Use of force isn't part of the agreement. It could have unpredictable consequences for the boundary. But if it comes down to survival..." I nodded, tucking the gun into my jacket pocket alongside the bone-handled knife I'd carried on previous routes. At 12:45 a.m., I departed in my truck, the modified headlights casting an eerie blue glow on the rural roads. The Webster property lay on the northern edge of Cabot, backing up against a stretch of dense forest that local maps identified only as Green Mountain Wilderness. According to Thaddeus, it was one of the most ancient entry points for the molar, which was why the Webster family's abandonment of the property was so concerning. I parked at the edge of the overgrown driveway, just out of sight from the main road. The house, a rambling Victorian with a sagging porch and boarded windows, loomed against the starlit sky. Even from a distance, something about it seemed wrong, as if the proportions were subtly off or the angles didn't quite align properly. Following the protocol I'd been taught, I checked my watch, 1:15 a.m., and gathered my supplies. The offering jar, a small bag of protective herbs, a flashlight with a special blue-tinted bulb, and Barbara's carved crow, which I'd come to see as a talisman of sorts. The revolver weighed heavy in my pocket, a last resort I hoped not to need. I completed the final words of the ritual, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The agreement is renewed, the boundary holds firm. So it was, so it shall be. The offering jar began to glow with a soft blue light. The entity behind me hissed, a sound no human throat could make, and the hand on my shoulder withdrew. "You've chosen your side, grief marked one," it said, "all pretense of being Hannah gone now. But the old families dwindle. The boundary weakens. Year by year, generation by generation, we grow stronger while they fade." I turned, finally facing the entity. It still wore Hannah's appearance, but the disguise was slipping, her features elongating, her limbs stretching to unnatural proportions, her eyes reflecting my flashlight's glow like an animal's. "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but not tonight." The offering jar's glow intensified, spreading to the boundary stone and then outward in a widening circle. The entity backed away, its form wavering between Hannah's shape and something tall and pale and wrong. "You could have had her back," it said, its voice distorting. "A perfect copy, every memory, every habit, every expression you loved." "But it wouldn't have been her," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Just a shadow wearing her face. Hannah is gone, and I'm learning to live with that." The blue light touched the entity, and it shrieked, a sound that pierced the night and echoed through the trees. Its form convulsed, stretching and contorting before my eyes until it no longer resembled anything human. Then it fled, moving with impossible speed back toward the Webster house. The ritual complete, I gathered my supplies and made my way back through the woods. The path seemed clearer now, illuminated by traces of the blue energy that had spread from the boundary stone. I felt it following me, reinforcing my steps, guiding me safely away from the property. When I reached my truck, Thaddeus was waiting, shotgun in hand. "It's done," I told him simply. He nodded, relief evident in his weathered face. "I heard the cry. One of them was displaced. It tried to use Hannah against me again," I said as we drove away, the Webster property receding in my rearview mirror. "Offered me a perfect copy of her." Thaddeus glanced at me. "That's a rare offer. They don't usually give up a successful mimicry so easily." "I don't think it was easy for them," I replied, thinking of the entity's anger when I rejected its offer. "I think it was desperate." "Because you renewed the boundary," Thaddeus said thoughtfully. "Perhaps they fear what you represent, new blood committed to the old ways. That's more dangerous to them than anything else." As we returned to the farm where the council waited anxiously for news, I realized something had shifted within me. The grief I'd carried since Hannah's death hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed somehow. It was no longer a crushing weight of guilt, but a quiet ache that felt almost like a form of connection to her memory, to this place, to the strange responsibility I had accepted. The pommeler had been right about one thing. I had chosen my side. 2 months have passed since that night at the Webster property. Winter has settled over Capet,
transforming the landscape into a monochrome world of white snow and grey skies. The roads are treacherous now, especially in the hollow hours, but the deliveries continue. I've settled into a rhythm, a new normal that would seem utterly bizarre to the person I was before coming to Capet. 3 nights a week, I drive the routes, delivering protections and offerings according to the ancient agreement.
The other nights, I study the council's records, learning the history and lore that most of the members absorbed gradually over lifetimes. Thaddeus has become something of a mentor, teaching me to prepare the simpler protections myself. "You have a knack for it," he told me last week as I successfully mixed my first batch of boundary salve. "Some outsiders never get the proportions right. My cabin feels different now. Safer, more like home." The protective charms have become just another part of my daily life, like locking the doors or checking the weather forecast. I reinforce them weekly, no longer feeling self-conscious about the rituals. The molar still test me on my routes. Sometimes I hear Hannah's voice calling from the woods, though less frequently now. Sometimes they appear as other people from my past. Friends, family members, once even as Thaddeus himself, standing at a crossroads where I knew the real Thaddeus couldn't be. But their mimicry has lost its power to truly disturb me. I've written to my brother Michael, breaking the long silence between us. I couldn't tell him the whole truth, of course, but I explained that I'd found a community in Cabot, a purpose that was helping me come to terms with Hannah's death. His response was cautious but hopeful, suggesting he might visit in the spring. Last week, the council held a ceremony officially recognizing me as an auxiliary member, not blood-bound to the land like the original families, but accepted as a guardian of the boundary nonetheless. Barbara tells me this is unusual, that most drivers either leave after their contracts end or remain in a sort of probationary status for years. "You've earned their trust," she said afterward. "What you did at the Webster place, facing that thing alone, refusing its offer, that proved something to them." The Webster property itself remains empty, though Edwin Fletcher's family has taken over responsibility for maintaining its boundary stone. According to Thaddeus, it will be at least a generation before the molar's influence fades enough for anyone to safely inhabit the house again. Yesterday, I visited Hannah's grave for the first time since leaving Burlington. The cemetery was peaceful under its blanket of snow, the silence broken only by the occasional call of a winter bird. I told her about Cabot, about the strange path my life has taken. I apologized again for the accident, but this time without the crushing weight of guilt that had once accompanied the words. As I placed flowers on her grave, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Hannah is gone, and nothing, not even the molar's perfect mimicry, could ever truly bring her back. But in losing her, I found my way to this place, to this strange responsibility that now defines my life. Tonight is delivery night again. My truck is loaded, the route mapped out. In 20 minutes, the clock will strike 1 a.m., and I'll begin my journey through the hollow hours. The molar will be watching from the woods, as they always do. The rules remain the same. The ancient agreement holds. And as I take my place in this hidden history, I realize something I never expected. For the first time since the accident, I'm no longer just surviving, I'm living.